The Fed knows that in reality, we have to get off the cheap money. The Fed has to stop stimulating. But the Fed is reluctant to remove the stimulus all at once. And I think maybe it's hopeful that if it just gradually weans us off it a little at a time, that it's going to work, right? So the Fed is still stimulating the economy, just not as much as it was. But I think that if you have an inflation problem, if you continue to fuel the fire, it's not going out. They're pouring less gasoline on the fire than they were, but they're still pouring gasoline on it. So it ain't going away. Inflation is a huge problem. The Fed has spent more than a decade cultivating this fire, putting all the kindling on it, and now it's huge, and it's not going to go away. And the reality is, there is no will in Washington to get rid of inflation. I mean, look at this omnibus spending bill that they just passed with big increases in spending. Where's the money going to come from to pay for all this spending? It's going to have to be created by the Fed. It's inflation. Congress has now decided that the way it's going to finance even bigger government than what we have now is through inflation. Inflation is the government's method of paying for spending. So inflation is going up, it's not going down. And ultimately, the Fed is going to reverse policy and go back to quantitative easing to accommodate these enormous deficits that are the result of reckless government spending. The real definition of deflation is a decline in the money supply, and inflation is an expansion of the money supply. But if you're thinking of deflation as, consumer prices coming down so that the CPI is lower at the end of the year than it was at the beginning of the year, nobody should be concerned about that. That's a good thing. Prices coming down are always a plus because we all want to buy stuff cheaper. That's why we react to sales. If something's on sale, we're more likely to buy it. We're not more likely to buy it if they jack the price up. In fact, we may not be able to afford it if they jack the price up. And if you can't afford it, one way that you may be able to afford it is if the price comes down. I mean, there are people who don't buy things until the price comes down and then they can afford it. But the idea that we need prices to go up, that was invented by the central banks. Look at the problem in Japan. They spent the last several years saying we don't have enough inflation, and they kept printing money and buying government bonds, and now they have a huge inflation problem. Inflation is now almost 4%, which is the highest in 40 years, and moving higher. And now what are they going to do? Because they've taken on so much debt because they said we needed this to get more inflation, as if prices going up 0.5% a year was somehow a problem. It wasn't a problem. I mean, it's a problem now that they're going up 4% a year, and the bigger problem is next year they could go up 6%, or who knows? I mean, inflation is now never going to go away in Japan, I don't think. Inflation is going to be a way of life for most of the world because central bankers have pursued inflation as a deliberate policy because they claimed that we didn't have enough of it. Well, now we have much too much of it.
In 2020, there was approximately 214 million working age people in the US. So how do we get nearly a 47% unemployment rate right now?
Just because they're not in the labor force doesn't mean they're not unemployed. But a lot of those people are unemployed and they're just not being counted as unemployed because they would probably take a job if they thought there was a job out there that they were qualified for. I think a lot of them have given up, or if they thought there was a job out there that could pay enough money to warrant giving up all the government programs. Because if you go from welfare to work, you face a very high tax break. Because not only do you pay payroll taxes on the money you earn, but you give up the money you're getting for nothing. And you can argue that the highest tax bracket, the highest marginal tax rate that there is in America is going from welfare to work. And so that is a major impediment. So a lot of people aren't working by choice because they would rather not. I mean, I'd like to take away the choice so that, look, you work or, you got nothing to eat. If there's a job out there, then you go take it. You can't just say, well, I'd rather get my food stamps and my welfare. No, you go take that job. But, we've created this thing. It's supposed to be a safety net, but it's not. It's a hammock. A lot of people are just kicking back in that hammock. Now, of course, there are also some people that are actually working. They're just not counted, right? They're under the table. They're getting paid in cash. They're doing something, on the side, or not on the side if they don't have a regular job. But the way the government keeps track of all these statistics, whether it's unemployment, inflation, economic growth, it's all skewed to try to put a brighter picture on, a gloomy reality. Because the politicians like to point to these numbers and say, see, look, we're doing good. Look at these numbers, right? And to me, it's almost like, a kid who's, grading his own report card. So we're letting the politicians grade themselves because the government comes out with their own report card. But they constantly change the methodology for how they calculate everything. And they do that to make the numbers look better.
Do you think the labor market is to blame for it, Peter? Well, considering that we have all kinds of people that are not working, are there not enough jobs for people to go to? Or is it, as you're saying, basically the change in tax rate from going to welfare to work, the major issue for getting these people back to work?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, that is a problem. Other people just don't even have the skills for the jobs that are available. And a lot of the unskilled jobs are not there because the minimum wage and other rules and regulations basically eliminate a lot of those jobs. But the government has made hiring those people too expensive. And so the market has figured out ways to do without workers because the government has artificially increased the cost of employment. And so we have priced a lot of people out of the labor market. And the problem with this is that when you price a lot of people out of the labor market, they never acquire the skills that they would have acquired had they had an entry point. Because a lot of the people that don't get jobs because of the minimum wage are very young people. And when you permanently remove the lower rung from the job ladder, well, now these people never get a foot on that ladder and they never get to climb up. And so, people say, oh, it's not fair if people go and get a job and they only make $4 an hour. How can you live on $4 an hour? Well, you can't. That's not the purpose of those jobs. It's not so that you can live on them. A lot of those people are still living with their parents. I mean, they're working for gas money. They don't need to pay rent with their minimum wage job. They just need to be able to hang out with their buddies on Saturday night. They don't need a lot of money. What they need are skills. That's what they lack. And the best place to get skills is on the job. So when you're young, you take a low-paying job. And as a result of that low-paying job, when you get older and you have more skills, you can earn more money. Then you move out of your parents' house. Then you can get married and have a family because you're no longer at a low wage because you are more valuable to employers because you've acquired a lot of on-the-job experience and now you're more valuable, right? But what the minimum wage law does is it makes it impossible for those young people to get that job, to get those extra skills. So when they're in their 30s and their 40s, they're still unemployed and they still have no skills. So, they're just a permanent underclass and maybe they turn to crime or something like that. But it's very unfortunate that the government has done this to people.